Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Awesome. Well, I'm going to jump right into things here. I am Todd Bursviller. I'm the VP of Cloud and Delivery. So basically, I oversee the teams that provide Jamf Cloud to you as a service. So all the cloud engineering teams, the cloud operations teams, everybody that wants to ensure that Jamf Cloud is the best available way to run your Jamf products. And so it is under the hood of Jamf Cloud. And when we talked about this, it actually came up because of conversations that I had with a lot of you last year, where a lot of different people were saying, how do you do this? How do you do that? Do you run on this platform? What about this technology? Are you using this cloud provider? And just lots of different questions. And then we did a scalability panel last year as well. And we had a lot of interesting questions that popped up that were very database-centric too. And we said, you know what? Let's actually talk a little bit more about what we do behind the scenes to provide Jamf Cloud to everybody. And so this idea was formed, and we will have a panel in a little bit with experts that actually build and deliver the service for Jamf Cloud. And so they'll join in a minute. Before I jump into that, I know a lot of you are not in the cloud yet or considering going into the cloud. So I want to do a little bit of an intro before I jumped into the panel. And the first thing that I wanted to say is, if you're thinking about Jamf Cloud, we offer a 99.9% guarantee, and that's an SLA that exists. And the interesting thing is it's not actually just for Jamf Pro, which is what a lot of people think right out of the gate, but we actually now offer this for Jamf School, for Jamf Now, and even Jamf Protect. So we have one legal agreement that you would sign when you become a Jamf customer, and we are committing to 99.9% across the board. And we do that because we know that we have the best staffing and coverage to provide whatever the workload is, however you want it delivered. We've got staff in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We've got staff in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. We've got staff in Amsterdam. We've got staff in Katowice out in Poland. We've got staff in Sydney. And if you know anybody in Tokyo, we're actually hiring 2 positions right now in Tokyo. So if you have any experts that you would like to put in touch with us, please do. But we do this because regardless of where the customer is, we want to ensure that you get the best and fastest service and support. And outside of that, when you think about it from a US standpoint, if you're focused on a US workload and you need assistance on maybe a Sunday, well, Sydney might already be online and be able to assist with that. And if they're not, we've actually gone a step further and we've hired second shift and weekend shift as well in the United States. And so regardless of when you need assistance, we most likely have staff that are working their first shift or they're available from an on-call perspective. And when I joined Jamf, it was just a little bit more than 2 years ago now at this point, we only had 2 regions. We had US East, and then we also serviced the EU through Germany. But shortly right after that, I should say, we launched Australia, we launched Japan, and this year we haven't slowed down. In fact, we launched US West Coast, the United Kingdom, and Jamf Government Cloud. So for some of those customers that have very secure workloads, where they said, we need to ensure that this doesn't leave an environment that is under the highest level of scrutiny and security, we want to ensure that we have an offering of that. And so we launched Jamf Government Cloud, and we'll continue to iterate on that and make it even better over time. And I'd be happy to talk about that during the Q&A portion. But it's also not just Jamf Pro. This year, we launched Jamf School. So in April, we actually took the technology that we got from ZuluDesk and brought it in to our Jamf Cloud environment built on top of Amazon Web Services and launched it in the East Coast. So regardless on if you're in the EU, whether you're in the US, or even global outside of that, we most likely have an offering for you. And another thing that comes up when you're talking about on-premise customers that are considering moving to cloud is JCDS. So you all have packages, and you need to ensure that you have fast package delivery for your employees. And most likely, a lot of you have global employees or employees that travel quite often. One of the challenges that comes up is how do you ensure that they can always get that content through self-service, for example, as fast as humanly possible as they do travel? Well, JCDS is a mechanism that you can do that with. So you can upload your packages to us. We will then put it on a global content delivery network, and we'll ensure that it's not throttled, that you get the full performance from that. And regardless of where you are, chances are we have an edge location that's pretty close by. And when I started to look at how many new edge locations we've added just this year, the platform that we use, I'm not even going to begin to map these out for you. You can just look at it, has constantly been improving by adding more and more locations. And the reason that I highlight this is I had one customer in the last few weeks say, I built out my own distribution servers in a given geography, and we used to serve all the content from there. But in fact, when we became a cloud customer, I just decided to run a test and upload it through JCDS, and to have that same employee in that same office download that through JCDS versus our on-prem distribution server, and it actually outperformed it, which blows me away. But when you look at the number of locations and how quickly that's getting iterated on, the performance is pretty incredible. So I wanted to touch a little bit on the teams that actually provide Jamf Cloud to you. And there are a lot of skill sets that are going to be represented on our panel. We've got people with a deep systems engineering background. So if you have questions about Tomcat, how do you handle monitoring, logging, alerting, they can definitely answer that. If you've got questions about automation, how do you handle this in such a scale so that when you decide you're going to become a Jamf customer, you can say, spin me up. It happens instantly. It's not a manual process. It's not, hey, let's talk to somebody to get something up and going. It's just completely automated. How did that happen? From a security standpoint, how do they ensure that the network that we operate is secure, that your Jamf Pro instance is going to remain secure? How do we ensure that we support the right ciphers? You can even take it down to that level if you'd like to. The people on the panel will be able to talk about that. Or you can talk about Linux administration, cloud knowledge, cloud development knowledge. They have all those skill sets here. And outside of that, we also have a lot of Java experts, and I've got a slide coming up that'll touch on that, and also database expertise as well. So when you're talking about how do you handle that, by all means, feel free to bring up those questions. And I won't pretend to even go to the depth that everybody on the panel is capable of going into. When you look at this slide and you look at the areas of garbage collection and G1, GC analysis, InnoDB optimizations, like if you want to take it down to a super low level, a very technical level, this is the group of people that you'd be able to do that with. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and have everybody on the panel come on up, unless I've scared them off at this point. Feel free to come on up. And you can talk about any of the things that I've already brought up. You can talk about monitoring. You can talk about observability. Any of these questions that you'd like to discuss are things that we would be happy to talk about. So with that said, Craig, why don't we hand you a mic and have you go first? Craig Schroth is our technical program manager, and he's going to help kind of run the panel and help answer a lot of the Q&A that you all might have. Jen is going to be running around. I don't know where you are, Jen, right now. Oh, right in front. She'll run around with a mic and answer questions. We do have some slides that we would happily go through, but I also want to ensure that we maximize Q&A time as much as possible. David Searing is our supervisor of cloud engineering at Jamf. Brayson, he's a systems development engineer that actually used to be our Jamf Pro admin. So when you talk about product knowledge, he was the person running internal Jamf at one point in time. Corey Mater. Corey basically created most of our Jamf Cloud offerings and launched the service back in the day. So he's been through everything you could possibly imagine, going from 0 devices in Jamf Cloud up to millions of devices in Jamf Cloud. And then Jesse is a member of our cloud operations team. So when you're talking about all of those global locations designed to help service the Jamf Pro environments, Jesse is the expert of that. So with that said, does anybody have any questions right out of the gate, or should I hand it off to Craig and let you jump through a few slides?
Well, hi, everyone. We have a couple of different options we can go through today. We're happy to take questions if anyone has any. We do also have a few things that we can run through that we've planned to talk about a little bit more, kind of just whatever anyone's feeling. So if I see a hand, oh, there's a hand. I see hands. Yeah.
Hello. I'll kick it off. So we're still on-premise solution. At some stage in the near future, we'll be looking at the options to migrate. I think the biggest thing for us would be cost. Licensing costs at the moment, I think the cloud solution is a little bit too much for us at the moment. Obviously, it's something that we need to forecast and look into doing that, because I think our existing strategy is resource heavy and is, burdening us. In terms of migrating to the cloud, do you have a strategy in which you migrate on-premise organizations to the cloud? And how does that look with devices that are already out in production?
Yeah, I'd be happy to work with that. So recently, within the past year, we've implemented a solution where we can actually take your existing infrastructure, migrate your database up to the cloud, and we can actually recreate your on-prem URL for your JSS. So your devices will continue to check in with the server. So it's your database from your on-prem environment. It's up in the cloud. All your devices continue to check in. It's pretty much a seamless process. You'll want to reach out to your customer success team. They can get you specifics on that, timelines, pricing, things like that. And then as far as your end users are concerned, depending on the size of your database, you're talking about a brief outage while we upload the database to the cloud, let our automation go ahead and recreate the environment in the cloud, but then server comes back online and it's fairly seamless for your end users.
Jesse, I know one of the questions I get often is, what does this mean in terms of the actual devices that are out there? Do they have to re-enroll? What does that look like?
Yes, in regards to re-enrollment, as long as we can reuse the same URL, devices will continue to communicate seamlessly, both Mac OS and iOS. As far as they're concerned, your certificate is valid. They have all the local data installed on them that matches up with the database that's in the cloud. So communication will continue as long as that URL is intact.
Hi, I don't know if you can see me around the side there. So we're currently on premises and we automate heavily using the API. And we load balance, and our Nginx server gives us a session persistence, basically to, once we make the first request, then all the subsequent requests go to the same server, which is really important when you're doing a bunch of API calls that have dependencies built in. From what I can tell in the Jamf Cloud, I've only used it a little bit, you don't get a persistence with your subsequent API calls. I don't know if you can sort of confirm that, or what seems to happen is you make a call, and then the second call finds that, because Jamf Cloud is clustered, right?
That is correct. I'm going to actually hand this over to Corey, because I think 3 of us looked at him as soon as this came up. So Corey, what do you have to say?
So we do have session stickiness enabled. We do use like an HA proxy or Nginx type service to do a very similar thing. We actually make sure that you're actually hitting the same proxy and the same backend Tomcat server once you've established that session. So as long as your connection can store that cookie, you would retain that server. So like in an API script, you may need to add to that script a way where you can store and reuse that cookie similar to like what a browser would in order to make sure that you're maintaining that same connection.
Okay, and that works with the classic API, or?
It should work for all APIs, classic and
Okay, maybe I'll try and see you afterwards.
Yeah, you can come see me afterwards too.
That would be great, thanks.
Great. Saw a hand here before and back there as well.
And I've got one over here. Sorry. Where?
The migration from the on-premise infrastructure to Jamf Cloud, is that something that's available for Jamf Cloud or only for Jamf Cloud Premium?
Jesse?
That's currently available for all of the Jamf Cloud offerings for the Jamf Pro server. Standard, premium, just the normal standard environments that is available for.
Okay, so that includes the to take the URL with us to.
Correct. Yep. We can do the
the
seamless
ISO
migration to the cloud even in a standard environment now.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Good question. And for anybody in the audience that might not know, the question was about standard versus premium cloud. Premium cloud is an environment that gives you version control as well. The standard environment is always going to run on the latest version of Jamf Pro.
So one of the drawbacks for my company was that we couldn't host the AWS KMS key. Is that going to be a possibility in the future?
I think I might handle this one. Craig or Dave, who would like to take it?
I can take it.
Okay.
We are always looking for new features to add into Jamf Cloud. At this time, we don't have anything on the roadmap to reflect that particular ask, but swing by the Jamf Cloud booth downstairs and let us know, and we'll get that added to our request list.
Any other questions? Yep.
Coming over here.
OK, back there first.
How do you determine the number of servers that you spin up per environment? Is it device-based? Is it the ratio between the device and the servers? And are those servers available for us to see in Jamf Pro?
It's a great question. Corey, you want to take this?
Yeah, I can take this one. So we've played around with a couple options. Originally, we based it on seat count and trying to have a server infrastructure that would scale based on seat count. We found that it's easier just to go with the per instance. So we've got a set number of instances, our Jamf Pro instances, that we deploy on a particular stack. And so the amount is different depending on what part of the stack that we're talking about. So whether we're talking about load balancer or the proxy service or the web application layer or the database layer, there could be a different amount of instances in different layers there. So we've got a set amount that we look at, and it's based mostly on memory and CPU scaling. So we're only going to put as many customers on a given Tomcat server, for example, as to what we predict the usage of memory and CPU is going to be on that server, so that we have plenty of usage for everybody.
And so I was also asking, are those servers shared between customers? But I guess you just kind of answered that. Is there any instance where you reach a certain maybe device count or size in the environment where the servers are not shared?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So one thing that is definitely that we are doing is we change the amount of customers depending on how large the resource need is for that particular customer. For example, one of the original things I was talking about was seat count. So if you're a brand new customer migrating into Jamf Cloud, one of the only things that we really have for information before you migrate your database in and before you start using is seat count. So based on your seat count, that will determine how many other customers that you may be alongside, whether it's none or whether it's 20 or 30. It definitely depends on seat count initially, and after it migrates in and we can understand the performance and behavior of that environment, we may shift that around and move that around to make sure you're getting the best performance.
It's a good question. I think I want to have Jesse take the mic because I've got a question for you on this topic too. But one of the things that you often face as a cloud operations engineer is watching the actual performance of the environment and figuring out what needs to change when something does need to change. Plus, you have a constantly moving target between things that might change from an underlying hardware, M3, M4, M5. Things change over time. How do you manage that as you see large numbers of devices come in, and how do you act based off when you see workloads change?
Sure. So number of factors in play there. There are large graphs you can draw based on things like a JSS version upgrade, for example. You can kind of see the same trends working across all of the graphs. So we utilize graphing software for monitoring resources on a number of resource points, such as memory usage, a number of different variables of memory usage, CPU usage, incoming connections. All of that gets monitored both on the individual level as well as overall between all of the Jamf Cloud instances. And we can start to make connections between, hey, this is a brand new product issue. It seems to be affecting resource allocation. This new JSS version seems to be affecting resource allocation. At that point, we can make some changes either on a broad scale or a smaller scale, depending on if it is a smaller amount of instances being affected, or if it is a large scale change, that is something we can deploy in a rolling fashion to try and make it as seamless and noticeable as possible.
Thank you. And I thought I saw a question over here. Actually, a couple.
A clarifying follow-up question for the gentleman to my right here. Todd, you mentioned something earlier about the difference between standard and premium. Isn't one of those differences the ability to have your server, you're on a dedicated server as opposed to being shared, or is that not one of the...
Good question. Craig, do you want to take this one?
Absolutely. Yeah, so one of the premium offerings, we do offer a dedicated tenancy as well as part of the premium offering. And coming through next year, we're actually looking at adding a bunch more features to premium. So things like SIEM integration, access log delivery, things like that, we're looking at actually adding to the premium product as well. So we'll be fleshing out a bunch of new features that will be probably talked about next year.
And then what my question actually was, because that was just a follow-up that occurred to me when he asked his, since going to cloud, I will say that my life has gotten way easier in terms of server maintenance and updating and everything. So kudos to you all on your promised uptime, because I see it and I don't have to troubleshoot my servers anymore. One of the only things I really miss from the old way of doing things for myself was direct database access, and not because I wanted to modify anything that was in there, but because for whatever pieces of information might be in the database that aren't available as API endpoints, I could just write a quick MySQL query or a big one and get whatever I wanted out of the information that I had in there. Whereas now, it's either got to be a feature that's in Jamf Pro or in the API. Is there any plan in the future to give cloud customers select access to the database?
That's a great question. Thanks for that. One of the things that we're actually exploring right now is like a few different methods for us to be able to offer additional data access in some variety. There's a bunch of different applications and philosophies that are available. Some of them, I think, as a cloud engineer, I'd be terrified of, like putting your database on the public internet seems like the worst idea I could come up with. Similarly, there are some tools that would definitely allow us to give you access to some parts of the data set. But we are also working with the Jamf Pro product team as well, kind of trying to identify what gaps specifically. Without knowing more specifically your use case, I'm just going to pluck something out of the air and say, like, I wrote an extension attribute that I want to make sure that the version or the history of that is maintained because I have an audit for that. That was something that I know that I've heard a few times from a few different customers, and also when I was a Jamf Pro admin myself, definitely know that pain too. So there's a few different things that we're looking at for, one, providing a data layer access in a couple of different fashions. We're looking at some larger scale applications that do some of that work, and also trying to figure out, as part of our premium offering, is there a way for us to deliver to your storage, a method for you having a local copy of your database backup? That's also another feature that we're investigating right now for premium. So those are things that we're kind of looking to see how can we get that data to you in a few different methods, but also with working with the Pro team to update the API to support that.
Over here.
Hello. Have you considered, or will you consider, publishing some kind of best practices guide for people that write or people that run Jamf Pro in their own AWS? So based off your extensive knowledge, publishing something like that.
Yeah, I think I'll take this one. It's one of the things that comes up periodically, and generally speaking, what we prefer to do is talk about how we can get people into our cloud, what are the limitations that we'd have to do to help make that happen. So what are you limited by? How can we remove that limitation to deliver that? And the reason for that is it's frankly quite complex. Like, as you saw in the earlier slides, you can talk about tuning settings at any one given level, but when you look at the aggregation of all of the knowledge that they've put into investing into that cloud offering and how it constantly is changing on a given year, it's hard for that to be maintained by anybody else that does not have the same level of engineering and operational staff elsewhere. And so that's generally our preference, to say, how could we make that happen? Is it a compliance requirement? Maybe you require something different that we don't have today. Or is there something else that we could do to make it more appealing or to remove the roadblock so that you could come into our cloud? It is where the vast majority of Jamf Pro workloads run at this point in time. And so that enables us to iterate more quickly in our own cloud environment.
So then one specific follow-up.
Yep.
What are you using now for load balancing? Are you using the Classic or application? I know it was Classic a few years ago, last time I talked to one of you guys.
Good question. Dave or Corey, who would like to take this?
Right now, we're kind of in a transitional period. We do still have Classic out there. It hasn't really, like, we haven't had a need for many of the features of the application load balancers, just kind of as a whole. As we're re-architecting and rebuilding, we are making the conversion over to that application load balancer, just kind of as our new standard, though.
Good question.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please, Corey.
So a couple of the features that we are looking to add, there are some things that come with ALBs instead of classic ELBs that we're looking to add in 2020, mostly related around security. But then also we do have some instances that are running on ALBs in our environment and network today. So we've kind of got that hybrid. So we've got some real life experience with both.
Hi, I'd like to second the request for MySQL access. It's, boy, I wouldn't want to have your job to try to implement that in a secure way, but there's several important scenarios that bring this to the front of my brain. One is where I got a question like, which scripts do you have that use the software update command? And if you've got 20 scripts, it's easy. If you've got 400 or 500, it's difficult to, without direct SQL access. The other is things like script or package where used things. Is this script still needed? So is it an orphan, not used in any policies? Or do we still need it? And if so, for what policies? And are they really being deployed? A lot of things like this that would be not impossible to implement in the API, but very awkward and not very efficient in terms of load on the server and so forth. Whereas a query is fractions of a second, you're probably talking about dozens or hundreds of API calls to determine the same information. Yeah, if you can find a way to swing it, that'd be wonderful.
I have a few thoughts on it, but Dave, I'm curious your thoughts with being a former DBA, having that strong background. What are your thoughts when it comes to working directly with the Jamf Pro database and kind of best practices around that?
Yeah, so I had spent a lot of time in support before I came over to the cloud team as well, and so this is nothing new, I think, through Jamf Pro, just through the life of the product as we go. I think Craig kind of hit the biggest nail on the head. The biggest challenge for us is making sure that the data that we have in Jamf Cloud is secure, right? So if we're giving access to the database publicly, that means that there has to be a route for you to be able to log into that and get there. That puts a lot of risk that something could accidentally compromise your data then, whether that's bad permissions that we accidentally granted somebody else access to your database, or a vulnerability in MySQL that allows us to get compromised there, right? So there's a lot of big challenges on that end. Now, I totally understand your request in terms of being able to do that reporting. And I think that is actually a really common thing, and that's kind of where Craig had mentioned where I don't think that we'll actually give full access to the database. Just, I mean, being very blatant there. I think that just opens up way too many risks that I don't think that we'd want to try to tackle. That doesn't mean that there won't be future options for something with custom reporting or some additional tooling to get you guys access to the data that you need. Maybe you can define a query in Jamf Pro and get a scheduled report to be able to get that just without having to actually log into MySQL directly, right?
And I think the other thing that I would add, having been at Jamf for a couple of years too, is as the database changes more rapidly, as new fields go, old fields might be deprecated, different things happen there. Our software engineering teams can maintain the API to ensure that the functionality that was intended is maintained from one version to another version. When you're doing a direct report on that data, things could change, and either they could break, or it could be maybe the data is not what it used to be because now the data is in multiple spots. It's just very complicated, but software engineering can kind of own that contract and that relationship if they keep it through the API. So it's one of the other reasons why we have that strong preference to keep things through the API.
Just a real simple question. So the architecture behind all this, it's Amazon Web Service, AWS, and if it is, does that mean that most of the off-ramps for that mirror Amazon's?
Good question. Who wants to take this?
I didn't catch all the questions.
The question was essentially, so is this on AWS? And I think the question was about off-ramp. So if you were to want to leave cloud, or if you needed to take this elsewhere, would that be an option? I'm looking at you, Bryson, only because you were the Jamf Pro admin for Jamf at one point in time, and you know how it's architected behind the scenes. Would you mind taking it?
And about the, like, for data access to it. So, like I saw you added Tel Aviv recently. There's only one point in Africa, that type of thing.
So is the question about like if you want to take your Jamf Cloud instance, go on-prem, or is it about like being able to get exports of the data somewhere for you to be able to access it?
Like to access the packages through self-service.
Okay, so Jamf Cloud distribution service, yeah, that's it's CloudFront. Like, there's no secret sauce there. It's CloudFront. So the way that works is the moment if you have a user in South Africa, the moment they request a package, they hit the edge locations first. If it's not present on any of the edge locations that are near them, then it goes straight back to the origin, which it's going to be whatever region your Jamf Pro instance is in, and then they download it straight from there, but at the same time, it's going through the edge point, and then it gets cached there. So if you have a second user after that first download is complete, making the same requests, they will go from the edge location after that. But for every single edge point that you saw on that map you put up there, it's going to have to do that first initial cache from wherever the origin is, which is going to be an S3 bucket in whatever region you happen to use Jamf Cloud.
Thank you for clarifying.
Hi. Any plans for multi-tenancy in the cloud?
Yes, thank you. Next question.
Come on, man.
So, speaking as the cloud technical program manager, there's lots of things that we'd love to do with how we operate Jamf Pro and how services work within our cloud or within multi-clouds, which is another conversation that we've had a few times already, even today, with some of the customers who stop by our desk downstairs. So I do recommend that you stop by and talk to us, so that way we kind of know what you're asking for.
Multi-tenancy is what I'm asking for.
Yeah. What are you looking to get out of multi-tenancy?
Not as an end customer, but as a managed service provider that might want to extend the features, advantages, and benefits of the product to my customers.
Oh, that sounds like a little bit different of an ask. So actually, one of the things that we're looking at as part of our feature set improvements for Jamf Cloud is offering some additional interface points that would allow Jamf, of course, also some managed service provider offerings as well to be able to concatenate individual instance to perhaps an MSP's ID, and then give a interface point that you would be able to possibly do some of that work. We're still in the early stages of the planning for some of the infrastructure changes that would be necessary to enable that, but it's something that we have heard requests for and are looking into.
Thank you.
Good question. Up here? Oh, sorry. We'll get you next.
Just to follow up for the multi-tenancy, I'm in a situation where there's a holding company, and the holding company owns the infrastructure for all of the tenants. And one of the questions is, do we go private cloud, build our own, or is there a solution out there that does tenanted cloud access? So there's definitely another business case out there for multi-tenancy.
Go get your badge scanned downstairs.
When that topic comes up, just for kind of full context, there are multiple ways of looking at multi-tenancy. One is more, I have greater management needs and automation needs to do instant spin up, spin down, managing across many different customers. And one is more of a, what do you want to do from a microservice backend architecture implementation standpoint. And so there are so many nuanced details to it, it is usually worthy of a dedicated conversation.
You mentioned earlier about premium being version control, which knee-jerk reaction is like, yes, that's something that you'd want to have that control over. Standard, if you moved your JSS version to the later version, would be seamless. It would move over as and when you release it. Have you ever had an instance where you have an end customer on the standard edition which broke elements of their infrastructure because they migrated without version control?
Good question. I'll answer briefly, and then I'll hand it over to Jesse, since you probably see more of the day-to-day customer escalations that come in. But generally speaking, if something were to break within our standard environment, we would take action on it. We'd try to resolve whatever the issue is to fix it. It's not something that would come up broadly. But one of the nice things is because we do have both of these environments, if we had to move workloads around for some technical reason, we have the capabilities to do so. With that said, Jesse, anything you'd add?
Yeah, so the only thing I would add is that the cloud has a whole lot of attention. Jamf is really centered around the cloud at this point. When a situation like that does arise, when there is something that's going to affect everybody en masse like that, there are a number of teams who pounce on that issue as quickly as possible. As opposed to like a rollback, we would dedicate a large number of the company to getting a hotfix pushed out to continue moving forward in a positive direction. There's really been no need to do an en masse rollback since I've been with the company, which is going on about 6 years now. Every time there has been a situation that's even come close to that scenario, we've been able to push out a resolution en masse to resolve the issue instead of rolling back on it.
Good question.
Couple of feedbacks and one question for you guys. First of all, wish us luck. Next week we have one of Jamf professional services flying in to help us the migration to the cloud. We've been running on-prem for 6 years now. Initially we debated the buying the premium, but when we sat down internally, it turned out all we were buying was insurance for just in case. So we are a huge Jamf proponent. So at some point, I'm hoping that the premium version goes away and becomes a standard. Because at some point that the product is not mature enough, we're hoping that you guys do your due diligence where we don't have to spend $20,000 just for insurance, oops, so we can avoid that. So having said that also, the other feedback is I'm sure some of those folks that sit in here, the next week is migration to the cloud, take 2. Because initially we paid someone to come in, I guess remotely. All they did was build the cloud-based, and they kind of moved on. So, and we were trying to figure out the best options. So we had to invest some time to lay out all the option scenarios. Option 1, the pros and cons. Option 2, pros and cons. Option 3, pros and cons. Once we had enough education, then we made the decision. That's the piece that was missing. And I think this session is important for folks to make that cloud migration, to have a core team that immediately jumps in to say, this is what needs to happen, right? And that's the piece that was missing. And we invest 5 months, and now next week, that's what we're going to do. So, but I'm looking forward to it. Now we have a clear direction. If any of you have any questions, you can come to me, and I'll give you that.
Yeah, this is actually a great time to promote too. There is another panel discussion tomorrow talking about just migrating to cloud, and there will be a lot of different lessons learned from both small and large companies. That'd be another great session if you're in the spot of thinking about converting to cloud. And that you could also talk through multiple people. I think some are standard, some are premium. Why did they pick what they picked?
Yep.
It'd be a great topic for that.
That'd be awesome, because I think that'd be more valuable. The one question I have, moving to the cloud, are there specific 1 or 2 or 3 feature set that we might lose because we move into the cloud versus running on-prem?
Brayson or Corey, you're the first ones to come to mind for this question. Who would like to take it?
Aside from the couple questions that you heard about direct MySQL access, which isn't exactly something that we would write down as a feature of Jamf Pro, no. In fact, I think it is the opposite. I think you gain features. So JCDS being the notable big one on that. So when you go cloud, getting JCDS, I think is a sign of the future. Like, I think you're going to see some more services and some more features. I'm not aware of any planned on the roadmap at this point in time, but I think you're going to see more of that. So we're going to try to make cloud more feature-rich, not less feature-rich than on-prem.
Good question.
So I've been, we're looking to go into the cloud, but it's a long process being with the company I am. one of the things we've been doing is looking at the beta and spinning up a cloud for that and kind of testing that out. I was wondering, is there going to be ever a feature to actually be able to import the database we currently have into the cloud base? I know you guys do that as part of the move-in, but it's just because, like when 1016 went away and 1017 came out, basically I lose the cloud instance and I have to recreate it again in 1017 and just kind of test things again. Just as a possible feature in the future to kind of do that. Also, a follow-up question after. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm interested in the beta version conversation. I think you and I should connect, a little bit after this. But as it pertains to, I want to test this version to that version. In not beta, there's actually a cloud sandbox instance where if you have the cloud, you're eligible to have a cloud sandbox instance.
Okay.
And with that, we do migrate version to version. We just haven't done it with beta. Because in particular, we can't really guarantee from a beta build to a beta build that something's going to work.
But only if you have the premium version that you have the sandbox.
No, you get cloud sandbox regardless if you have premium or standard.
One extra thing, just I want to add on to what Corey said. I know that the beta and RC teams have both highlighted that particular use case. Even if it's not necessarily migrating like a 10.16 beta 1, 2, 3 version up, but being able to maintain some amount of consistency between them, so that way when you pick up the 10.17 beta, that you're able to proceed on. So there are some conversations happening about that, and I would not be surprised if you start hearing a little bit more from the beta teams about that.
Yeah, at this point, I kind of have like the minimal version of what we need to kind of get working. So if I have to rebuild it, I can rebuild it fairly quickly, but it's still like a day process. The second question is, when we do go to cloud, and obviously we talk about AWS and having shares all over the place, when we upload the packages to you guys, is there the ability to still keep an on-prem distribution point because in case you don't have coverage in those areas?
Absolutely, that's a feature of the product that we have available. By opting into JCDS, you don't lose any of the other features that are there, so you can define your distribution points however you prefer. On that note, I know that as we're looking ahead to 2020, and as Todd highlighted out, we're looking at new regions all the time. So I wouldn't be surprised as well if there's an announcement at some point in the future where we talk about some new regions and offering additional support in closer origin and edge locations as those services are developed.
One more thing to add in on the sandbox conversation. There is a cloud sandbox that's eligible for any cloud customer. And then there's an additional premium cloud sandbox where if you needed that isolated architecture for your sandbox as well, because otherwise a normal cloud sandbox would be running in our standard environment, not in our premium environment, with no version control. It would be upgraded whenever we want to upgrade to the latest version.
There was a question on, is it specific to the instance or not? Corey, I don't know if you want to attempt to answer that or clarify it.
So as far as the data that's in there, by default, what you have is a sandbox instance that is just kind of a playground for you. So you can go in there and define some new policies, define config profiles. You'd have unique devices enrolled to it. There are tools like the Jamf Migrator to help you kind of sync data between like a production instance and your sandbox using the API. But there's a lot of challenges to try to do that through anything outside of just the API, especially as you go between versions and as things change. So there isn't really a process to say take a copy of your database and make that a sandbox one. And Jesse, you can maybe speak to this a little bit more, but prefer to use that Jamf Migrator tool to just kind of copy over the relevant objects that you want to kind of seed that sandbox with.
The Migrator tool basically copies over everything it's safe to copy over. Computer records, things like that, you don't want to copy over. You want to have a very specific set machines enrolled into that test environment. That being said, it is a completely separate environment. It's not really tied to your prod environment in any way, shape, or form. So you really can do whatever you want to it, test out new workflows, anything you want to test in a development environment that you're worried about affecting other machines, other policies, things like that. This is yours to do with as you will. All of your tokens would have to be unique for this environment. So you'd have to have a separate APNS, separate VPP, and separate DEP token. If you try and upload them, it's a bad time.
So I want to wrap this up because I know that we're at time here, but any of you are welcome to stop downstairs. There is a Jamf Cloud booth. We'd be happy to talk on a one-on-one basis. We'd be happy to share a little bit more about where we're going, our roadmap activity. I know we didn't get a lot of time to dive into some of that, but really appreciated the conversations. Thank you all so much, and please stop by and let's continue the conversation.